Welcome, everyone, to the Ecopsychology Café. Hello, my name is Carol Koziel, and I'm the founder of the Canadian Ecopsychology Network, the host of this series. Monica Dragoz and I co-created this program. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that I live in the traditional territory of the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people under the treaties of peace and friendship. I offer gratitude to the Indigenous peoples who live here now and who have lived here for thousands of years for the legacy of caring for the land, water, fire, and air. I acknowledge the many creatures and living beings whose habitat was here and is here today. I acknowledge the ongoing impacts of colonization and systemic oppression of the people and the land on which we reside. Today, as we discuss the importance of our relationship to water, I invite all of us to uncolonize our work, to embrace wider systems of care and concern. So today, I'm so grateful to be in conversation with Gregary Ford about healing our relationship with water. Greg is Vice President of Swim, Drink, Fish. What a great name. And he'll be telling us more about his work in a moment. Gregary holds degrees in environmental planning, natural resource management, and ecosystem restoration, further solidifying his commitment to finding innovative solutions for a healthier aquatic future. Welcome, Greg.
Thanks, Carol. Thrilled to be here.
Great. The airwaves are yours.
Okay, perfect. I'm just going to start to share my screen. Alrighty. I also just want to apologize in advance. You might hear some jackhammering and some sawing. I do have contractors here. It's the reality of our new world, so I just ask you to bear with me as we get through this presentation. If it gets too bad, I might mute for a moment, but I'll unmute very quickly. So I just want to start by introducing myself. Like Carol said, I'm Greg Ford. I'm the Vice President of Swim, Drink, Fish, but more importantly, I'm an avid water lover. I've been swimming, drinking, fishing since I can remember. And I'm thrilled to work at an organization that allows me to espouse those values through living my life and through the work that I do. So I live in Dundas, Ontario, right at the western tip of Lake Ontario, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. The original peoples of this land have stewarded the land and water since time immemorial, and there's much that we can learn through collaboration, cooperation, and learning from treaties, and through our ongoing disrespect of treaties. And that's tied to our great standard of living that we enjoy here in Ontario and throughout Turtle Island. So there's much that we can learn and grow together. But I'll start with an introduction about Swim, Drink, Fish. Swim, Drink, Fish is an environmental charity based in Canada, and we've been working for a swimmable, drinkable, fishable future since our launch in 2001. We blend science, law, education, and storytelling with technology in order to empower millions of people to know and safeguard the waters that they love. We focus on water because all communities need swimmable, drinkable, fishable water to thrive. We empower people because it takes a community to protect water. And we create communications tools because, as we've seen in the last couple of years, it's technology that has the power to engage enough people to protect our waters. So put simply, Swim, Drink, Fish is a movement of people dedicated to ensuring a swimmable, drinkable, fishable future for waters across North America. So a little bit of history of who we are and how we got started before I get into our theory of change. We really started around the 2000s in response to the 1990s after a surge of environmental protection laws in the 1970s. We saw our Canadian government start to make significant cuts to environmental laws and environmental protections across the country. And so in 1996, our founder and president, Mark Matson, started a volunteer group dedicated to giving meaning and force to the remaining environmental legislation that we had in Canada. So at least the legislation that we did have had enough teeth to protect our environment. In 2000, when we experienced the Walkerton tragedy in Ontario, where 7 people died and thousands became ill from contaminated tap water in Walkerton, Ontario, our founders teamed up to trace the origins of the tragedy as principal litigators on the case and to develop new rules for Ontario's drinking water. That formed the new organization that we called Lake Ontario Waterkeeper, which was a part of the international waterkeeper movement. These waterkeepers started springing up all over North America in the mid 2000s, and Fraser Riverkeeper Society was founded out west in BC to start to protect Vancouver waters. In 2011 to 2013, the Canadian government again started to roll back and it got environmental laws, particularly around water protection. And so we turned our eyes to community-based monitoring to take the place of some of the environmental cuts that we'd seen to empower communities with the tools they need to monitor their waters to ensure swimmable, drinkable, fishable futures. That's where we started diving into the world of technology, and we released our flagship app, the Swim Guide. And as of 2017, Lake Ontario Waterkeeper, Fraser Riverkeeper, North Saskatchewan Riverkeeper, and many other riverkeeper and waterkeeper organizations in Canada consolidated under the name Swim, Drink, Fish to represent exactly what we were here to do, to ensure water could be used for swimming, drinking, and fishing. And so swim, drink, fish, as Carol said, it's in the name. It's all the things that we should be able to do with our water. But it's not always just, is water swimmable, or is it drinkable, or is it fishable? Swimmable water means more than just being able to enjoy a day at the beach. It means being able to touch the water, having access to the water, and being able to immerse yourself within the life-giving liquid that it is. Drinkable. Every community on our planet is intrinsically connected to their watershed for their drinking water. So that water should be protected at all times. The health of our waters is an indicator of the health of our communities, and there's no other way around that. When we have unhealthy waters, we have the foundation of an unhealthy community. And fishable. All life depends on healthy water to survive. So fishable water means that we have waters that can support an aquatic ecosystem and is viable for aquatic life. So our work at Swim, Drink, Fish extends beyond the human need to protect all levels of the freshwater ecosystem from urban life to wildlife. So by the numbers, Swim, Drink, Fish as a movement has had some tremendous accomplishments in the last number of years. We've engaged 10 million people in our guides, our Swim Guide, our Great Lakes Guide, to find places where they can connect with their waters. We've engaged over 5,000 people in water literacy trainings and awareness workshops, collecting over 8,000 samples across 27 locations in Canada so that we could collectively restore over 30 square kilometers of habitat. We work consistently and diligently to propose new rules to protect our beaches, our fisheries, access and navigation on our water, promote data openness, and prevent sewage and plastic pollution in the waters where we call them home. And ultimately, as the result of this work, over $2.2 billion has been invested in swimmable, drinkable, fishable communities, in improving our infrastructure so that we can ensure that our water can be used for our purposes. But how do we do our work? We have a four-part theory of change, which is based on four principles: connect, collect, share, and restore. So our programs are designed to connect people to the water's edge, where we train community scientists to collect and share water quality and health data. We then leverage that network and that data to restore our natural waters together. So we largely use community or citizen science and communications technology to inspire people just like you, just like me, to safeguard our local waters together. And the reason that we find this so successful is because people protect what they love. And that love begins with their connection to water and to nature. So for this presentation, I'm going to focus on the recreational water community. So people who traditionally go to the water to beach, who go to the beach to swim, to fish, to surf. The recreational water community in Canada is pretty massive. It's estimated that nearly 2/3 of Canadians swim in natural bodies of water like lakes and rivers at least once per year. That's 26 million people. If those 26 million people all understood their inherent connection to their water, they were knowledgeable about the waters that they love, and they had the tools to protect them, just imagine the difference that they could make together. So it's that potential for transformative impact is what drives the Swim, Drink, Fish movement. And it's what personally drives me. It's my love for Lake Erie specifically that brought me to the Swim, Drink, Fish movement. So when I was around 6 years old, my mom decided to take me and my younger brother, pictured here in the photo, on a trip around the Great Lakes to go camping and to swim in each one. This trip was in early May, and like I said, my mom wanted to ensure that we got in each of the lakes. It was important to her that we did that. But again, early May, as you can imagine, these lakes in Canada were pretty cold. Um, we started on Lake Ontario, and I remember each of these lakes pretty distinctly because I grew up going to Florida. So I grew up being exposed to the Atlantic Ocean. And once we got to Lake Ontario, I remember thinking, okay, we're back on the ocean. Like, there's no way that there's this much water in Ontario. I didn't realize the Atlantic Ocean was that close. Um, I was 6 years old. But I remember going to sandbanks and seeing the dunes and the sand and the crystal clear blue waters and really just loving it. It was like Florida, but better. And from Lake Ontario, we went to Lake Huron. And I remember seeing some of the sand dunes near Goderich, the remnant sand dunes from some of our uh, lakes of geological eras past that we can no longer make, those remnant dunes that are hundreds of feet tall, and just being amazed that there was that much sand that could be present in an Ontario lake. From Lake Huron, we went up to Lake Superior, and again, I was astounded by just how much fresh water there was. The Sweetwater Sea was an incredible sight for a young Greg. And we made our way through the states, through Lake Michigan, and we ended up back in Ontario. And I remember things feeling familiar. This had been maybe 3 weeks, and we were headed towards Lake Erie, and things were getting warmer. And I remember seeing the road signs and thinking that this felt like home. Like I'm close to home now. And I remember getting in Lake Erie at the end of a long 3 week journey, and where each lake was cold, Lake Erie being the shallowest of Canada's Great Lakes and the US Great Lakes, Lake Erie was warm. Uh, and that stuck with me when I was 6. And every year from that point, I begged my mom to go back to the warm lake, to go back to Lake Erie. And eventually, it became an annual tradition where we would spend our time on Lake Erie. We would go camping there, we would go fishing there, we would go swimming there. And as I became an older adolescent and as I became an adult, I kept going on my own. And I remember when I was an adult, actually when I turned 19, I wanted to take some friends and I to Pelee Island to see the wineries there, to experience the lake that I'd fallen in love with when I was 6 years old. Um, and so my friends and I got together, we booked a hotel on Pelee Island, and we were all prepared for our stay. Now, again, this was in 2011, so you might know where this story is going if you know Lake Erie's history. But we showed up very excited. We went to sleep. We woke up the next morning and went to the water's edge, but the water was green. Um, 2011 saw the most damaging, large, widespread, harmful algae bloom that Lake Erie had seen at that point. Of course, it was to be outdone just a mere 4 years later in 2015. But in 2011, the city of Toledo, Ohio, had to declare a state of emergency because Lake Erie, the drinking water source for the city, was unsafe to drink. It was unsafe for human consumption. And while I was on Lake Erie, while I was on Pelee Island, it was the first time that I was told, and in no uncertain terms, you can't swim here. And so that was a bit of a turning point for me, a watershed moment, if you'll forgive the pun, where I knew that I had to do something about it. And because I was 19, I was entering university, and I was able to sort of change everything. And ultimately, that's what led me to focus on addressing these issues that were impacting the lake that I loved. So I went in to study sciences, to study policy, to study natural resource management, all so that I could do something to address the issues that were impacting the lake that I'd fallen in love with. Eventually, that's what brought me to the Niagara Peninsula because there was an opportunity there to engage in a program that was focused on ecosystem restoration. And I knew that I'd wanted to restore coastal wetlands so that I could address phosphorus issues, so that I could address those algae blooms that were plaguing my beloved lake. And it was being in Niagara that ended up putting me in touch with an emerging coalition of ENGOs that were in that region that were working together. And When I moved to Niagara, I ended up working with this emerging coalition to form a new collaborative called Niagara Coastal. And ultimately, that's what led me to Swim Drink Fish. As Swim Drink Fish approached Niagara Coastal to start what they were piloting as a new way of addressing water quality concerns at the community level. And I knew at that moment that like if I could have those tools available to me to inform and inspire someone else to do what I did in a much easier way without 8 years of schooling, then I wanted to do it. So I threw my hat in that ring and I knew that I had to get involved. And really, that's what has led me here in this virtual room talking to you all today, speaking about the swim, drink, fish movement. It's that theory that change happens when you connect with water. From there, together we can collect data, we can share the information and knowledge, and then together we can restore those waters that we love. Because it doesn't matter what water body you're from, or what pressures it's facing, or even how it appears as first glance, as you can see with this marina in Port Colborne. Somebody is recreating there. So some water body somewhere is a part of your story, just like Lake Erie is a part of mine. And so what I just went through with all of you is an example of a watermark, which is an initiative that we at Swim Drink Fish run to collect an archive of stories about people's connection to water. So just like a watermark is a mark that's left on paper to tell you where it comes from, our watermarks are the marks that water leaves on our very soul that tells us where we've come from. And it's also a call to action. And it's a way of using stories as legal evidence around a body of water to say that not only is the water loved, it's being used. And because it's being used, it's worthy of legal protections. So we use watermark as a way of giving meaning to your story, just like we gave meaning to those environmental laws. And collectively, we can turn that storytelling into an action in the swim, drink, fish movement. So at this point, I want to take a bit of a turn and talk about the public health aspect of water. Water is a very interesting field to work in because so much of it transcends classic environmentalism and gets deep into public health, resource management, recreation. And because there's such a spiritual and cultural connection to water, it's a blending of a lot of different worldviews, viewpoints, and diverse peoples that come together to form like the water stakeholders and rights holders. So it's a really engaging and personally very fulfilling place to work. But swim, drink, fish and our work really sits at the confluence of public and environmental health. Humans are inextricably interwoven into our environments. And if you're familiar with the One Health theory, it posits that we impact our environment and our environment impacts us. So as an organization, we position ourselves to meet people where they are and then inspire that movement and those actions based on what we care about. And for a lot of people, that's recreation. And so that's how we do enter the recreational and public health side of the equation. This is because those places that we love, those waters where we're connected to, are not always safe. Lake Erie wasn't safe when I visited in 2011. It wasn't safe in 2015. And many times over many years, a lot of our waters aren't safe for consumption or for recreation. As I said, over 2/3 of Canadians interact with water recreationally per year. And so as of last year, that's 26 million people. Swimming in water polluted from bacteria like E. coli can cause waterborne infections, gastrointestinal distress, ear and eye infections, and other illnesses. And in Canada, that's estimated that it's almost 400,000 people a year that get sick from exposure to contaminated water. That number is much higher in the States and in other countries, just based on population, but it's a problem. We hear rumors and we hear the snide remarks that Lake Ontario is just Toronto's toilet and that the Halifax Harbor isn't really water anymore. But like all urban myths, there is kind of a glimmer of truth behind those adages. Canada and most other countries in the world have a serious problem with human waste that we don't really like to talk about. So I want to just briefly touch on combined sewers because it's an old problem, but it's a big problem that we have in Canada and the US and many cities around the world. But it's a primary mechanism by which sewage enters our waterways through something called combined sewer outfalls and sewage bypasses. Combined sewers are, well, when we talk about sewers, we have two different types of sewers mainly. We have sanitary pipes and stormwater pipes. In some instances, many instances, these are combined. Sanitary pipes are those connected to our toilets, showers, dishwashers, in commercial ventures. And then our stormwater sewers are those that are connected to our storm grates. They collect storm runoff and snow melt, things like that. But oftentimes in some of our older cities, we have combined sewers. And they're underground pipes that collect both wastewater from homes and stormwater from roads. They're also connected to wastewater treatment plants, but because these can often be overloaded, they often have pipes that sort of overflow in the presence of heavy precipitation or heavy volumes. And as our climate conditions are worsening and precipitation rates are increasing, these things are happening more often as combined sewer overflows, outfalls, or sewage bypasses, where sewage directly bypasses a water treatment plant just because there's so much of it. Sometimes this is partially treated, oftentimes it's not. And so we often deposit these substances directly into our water, where we have a connection, where we're swimming, drinking, and fishing. These combined sewers rarely work as they should because of this. You can see here, this is an example from the city of Toronto of what they look like inside. We have a traditional conveyance mechanism, but oftentimes when people flush things that shouldn't be flushed, like sanitary wipes and just other human waste byproducts, that can lead to dams in these systems and they overflow. And a lot of the time that overflows directly into our receiving water bodies. So we see needles, we see tampon applicators, condoms, we see all sorts of things in our beaches that we shouldn't be seeing. And this is just to give you a local glimpse as to the extent of the issue. So this is a map of all of the cities that have combined sewer systems that reports to something called the Wastewater Systems Effluent Regulation, or WRSR, and whose data is released openly through that platform. These are just the ones in the Great Lakes region that anything within the Great Lakes region will eventually deposit effluent directly into the Great Lakes, even if it's just a nearby river. So this should illustrate just how widespread these effluent events are, rather. But this condition holds through the rest of Canada. We have these systems on the West Coast, we have these systems on the East Coast, and it's something that we're trying to address as an organization and as a movement. But beyond just like the human health impacts, there are tremendous environmental health impacts that come from sewage. It's kind of a catch-all. Sewage can cause any problem that we imagine for aquatic ecosystems. So sewage impacts shellfish beds, it impacts fish survival, it contaminates water supplies, and it destroys aquatic life. It increases turbidity and cloudiness of the water so that sunlight penetration doesn't occur, so that our plant life doesn't grow quite as well as it did. It adds increased amount of nutrients to our water, leading to eutrophication, increasing those algae blooms that I'm personally so concerned about. It depletes the oxygen in the water column, leading to fish mortality. So once you know what you're looking for, the extent of the damage can become pretty obvious, even at a glance. Like when we're looking at this photo, we can see that this kayaker is swimming or kayaking directly through a plume of sewage entering the Toronto harbor, which is not pretty. And even the simple act of kayaking through this aerosolizes some of that water and some of the waste in that water, and it poses a risk to the human health as well. So I want to just zoom in really close to a specific example in the city of Toronto, and specifically the west end of Toronto and the Humber River. The Humber River is one of three major rivers just in the city of Toronto. So it's one river in one city, in one area in Canada, just to illustrate the extent. So between April and October of each year, when these results are actually reported, because they're not reported during the winter and during spring runoff and a couple of things where there's high precipitation events, 28 combined sewer outfalls bring an average of 851 million liters of untreated sewage just into Lake Ontario, just from that one river. Adding to this is the over 500 million liters of sewage that is partially treated that occur from bypass events, where during heavy precipitation, our sewage treatment plants can't handle the volume of effluent, and so we just redirect it into receiving water bodies. So that's 500 million on top of the 800 million. And so since 2018, in the last 6 years, that's over 1,400 Olympic-sized swimming pools, which is a staggering amount of sewage to enter from just a single river. And keep in mind, the city of Toronto, that's one of 3 rivers. And Toronto is one of over 200 cities in the Great Lakes. Not all cities have combined sewers, but many of them do. So what can we do about it? Well, it's a hard problem to solve. Ultimately, we need to bring attention to it. Importantly, so that people who are using the water to swim, drink, or fish are aware of the risks, so they know that they're safe when they recreate. But it's also, we need to do this so that we can bring attention to the scale of the issue and advocate for changes to protect us and our environment. So at Swim, Drink, Fish, we use this to train people to collect water quality samples, environmental observations, pollution and litter information, so that we can provide that information to our public health authorities, our coastal managers, and our governments to empower them with the information that they need to actually make the change happen. So this is where we get into the bulk of our work, which is community-based science, through what we call our community-based monitoring hubs. These are where we connect people to water through collecting water quality samples. So we empower community scientists or individual independent citizens or homeowners with the tools and resources they need to monitor beach and water or beach water quality and to share those results with the public through our platforms like the swim guides and like public health websites. We've been doing our own investigations with water quality for research, reports, investigations, legal action, and media training since our first day back in 2001. But over the years, we've determined that the best approach is actually to monitor these sites routinely, regularly, because to know if waters are swimmable or if they're drinkable or if they're fishable, these samples need to be collected on a regular basis because just like the weather, water quality changes all the time. It changes with the amount of precipitation we get. It changes with the amount of like the temperature that's in the air and that's in the water. And so it's crucial that we have as up-to-date information as possible because if I'm going swimming somewhere, I'm going to want to know if that water sample was taken yesterday or if it was taken 3 weeks ago because I don't know what it is today. And so these hubs are springing up across the country where community leaders are speaking up for the water and they're identifying issues of community concern. Often this is sewage and E. coli, as we'll see in some later slides. These issues tend to exist everywhere, but there are many concerns that people have about the quality of their water and the quality of their beaches, those places that they've fallen in love with. Things like contaminants, heavy metals, nutrients, personally algae for me, and so many others. Each hub, because of that, operates kind of distinctly, like they're all a little bit unique in what they focus on, but at their core, they all follow our standard operating procedures. This was developed so that we would have sufficient quality control, the highest sort of set of standards and like rigorous quality assurance protocols built in so that we can overcome that stigma around community science, like it's not real science because it's not done by a scientist. But as someone who's classically trained in science, I can promise you if I can learn how to take a sample, then anyone can learn how to take a sample. My mom can take a sample. She has taken a sample. So it's absolutely something that we can be doing and should be doing together. And the gatekeeping of science for decision making often can be used as a tactic to preclude people from entering the conversation and the discourse for sustainable ecosystem management and protecting our water resources. So we've got lots of different hubs. We've got lots of areas where people have put their hand up and say they are concerned about their water and they want to do something about it. And our first monitoring hub was in Toronto. We have been routinely monitoring the water quality in the Inner Harbor, on the Toronto Islands, in the eastern and western watersheds for about 8 years now. Again, this is largely focused on sewage and E. coli because Toronto is such a large city, because it's such an old city. We have a massively growing population. It's a concern for a lot of folks. And despite being one of the freshwater capitals of the world, people are disconnected from their water in Toronto. And so that's really what our work there focuses on, rectifying and restoring that relationship because Despite all of those issues, Toronto's got some pretty spectacular water quality, which I'll get into in a minute. Our next partner was with Jabosing First Nation on Manitoulin Island. They were our first partner, where we worked alongside the water treatment operators to ensure that the source water was clean and protected for holistic community health for swimming, drinking, and fishing. And so with that, Jabosing has gone on to focus their efforts on food sovereignty by assessing contaminants in smelt, which is a historic food source for the community and an economic driver. Our next partnership was with the North Saskatchewan Riverkeeper. So our standard operating procedures and approach was then used to create a hub in Edmonton, Alberta, where we focus again on sewage pollution in river environments because it's another old city, to ensure that the river remains clean for a community that's dependent on it for recreation, spirituality, and economic growth. Our next hub was in Niagara, and this is where I got involved with swim drink fish, starting hubs across the country. Niagara was partnered with the collective forum of ENGOs that I was talking about a little bit earlier in the presentation, Niagara Coastal, and it was focused on Lake Erie. So this is really where I got involved and I was really excited to participate. There were E. coli concerns, but most of the E. coli in the Niagara region, most of the combined sewers actually flow north into Lake Ontario. But that doesn't mean that it was absent in Lake Erie. And so a big part of the work that we were doing was assessing why there was E. coli and what we could do about it, but also addressing the algae that I noticed when I was a young adult going to Pelee Island and I was told that I couldn't swim because Niagara region hosts their beaches because of algae presence, which makes sense. And so that's what Niagara Coastal focused on, alongside, you may have heard some of the recent stories about Chatham Kent and full houses falling into the water with the amount of erosion that's occurring on the shoreline there. We started Fraser Riverkeeper, and we have our Vancouver monitoring hub with that organization, which again focuses on sewage pollution, but has since gone on to work with communities on Vancouver Island and up into the Great Bear Rainforest around salmon and shellfish to ensure that our water on the coast remains fishable for the communities that rely on it for their economic prosperity and their sustenance. In Kingston, well, we've always had a presence in Kingston, but we did start a hub in Kingston as well. We were thrilled to do so to assess water quality in partnership with the City of Kingston and the Kingston Marine Museum to bring attention to some of the really incredible and major steps that the City of Kingston has undertaken to improve its water quality and to help showcase its story to others in the Great Lakes as a bit of a precedent for what cities can accomplish if they participate fully into the swim, drink, fish movement. And I'll get back to this with specific examples a little bit later on. We partnered with Garden River First Nation to do some really interesting studies around E. coli and benthic macroinvertebrate or water bug health to assess general water quality parameters and how the water quality is doing from an ecosystem standpoint. And you'll see in the photo here that we did some really interesting work using drones to assess the water quality and land quality of some culturally significant water bodies and powwow grounds, which is one of the coolest examples I've seen of integrated two-eyed seeing in science and management in a long time. And just an example of what's possible through collaboration when you're working to restore waters to be swimmable, drinkable, and fishable. And then we continued this work with Bittigong Nishnabeg on the north shore of Lake Superior, where we worked together to identify pollution sources like the proposed Marathon Palladium mine that are impacting culturally significant Pick River, where the community's been located. Today we're working on, with Bittigong Nishnabeg on some dune restoration projects that were actually developed on Lake Erie by Niagara Coastal, brokered through Swim Drink Fish to enact the same level of change in northern Lake Superior that we'd had in Lake Erie, which is a really cool example of collective impact that I'm thrilled that we can be a part of. And our most recent hub is on Victoria Island, or sorry, Vancouver Island in Victoria, where we're monitoring E. coli, nutrients, and engaging an island that's filled with lake stewards and preserving some of the highest quality water in the most recreational areas across Canada. If you've ever had the opportunity to be on Vancouver Island and in Victoria, you know that it's a community that lives on the water. And so to be able to contribute to that stewardship is truly an honor. And then in this hub, we also partner with Power to Be, which is an organization that's helping us ensure that our monitoring programs are accessible to all peoples, regardless of physical abilities. And so these are what our hubs look like, but specifically, what do they do on a regular basis? Well, they empower people to monitor and protect their local water bodies by being provided the opportunity to learn about and become more connected with the water in their community. Like I said, it's driven by community science, meaning that it's individual members of the community who are directly able to contribute to answering the questions that they have, like the surprisingly complicated questions of where can I swim or is the water clean? Because it's not always cut and dry. And so this helps to build what we call water literacy, which I'll get into in a moment. And so by participating through this model, individuals get to conduct weekly recreational and non-recreational water sampling and field observations. They fill out environmental field and health and safety surveys. They share data publicly through our open data portal and our website and app. And they teach people about their local waters so that they too can become water literate. And we do all of this to encourage water literacy in communities. So to be water literate means you know how you use and affect the water around you, you know where your water comes from, and you recognize and report threats. You're also able to then make choices that benefit you and your water equally in that One Health approach. And so when a community is water literate, people in that community are connected with their water, meaning they're connected to nature, they're connected with each other, and they're connected to something larger than themselves. So connect and collect are two very important steps to activate people in the swim, drink, fish movement, but our audience is often limited to those around us, meaning that the incredible work that we and our partners do is often just limited to our local geographies. And so that means that it can often go unrecognized and at times unsupported. So Swim, Drink, Fish engages in active and continuous sharing of data and information through our tools and platforms, through storytelling, so that we can amplify the work that these groups are doing and bring them the necessary eyes and attention that translates directly into support. And so with that, we developed the Swim Guide. The Swim Guide is a free app and website, and it's the most comprehensive beach information service in the world. It's helped over 60 million decisions be made around where we spend our time, how we recreate, where we can be safely immersed in the water. And it shares up-to-date water quality information for over 10,000 beaches across 11 countries. We have a swim guide affiliate program that comprises over 130 other organizations who contribute to this platform on a regular basis so that they can share their information with their community to make safe and informed decisions about how they recreate and how they participate in the swim, drink, fish movement. So we believe that making test results public gives you direct access to the information you need, particularly when we're dealing with things like CSOs and sewage in our water, so that you can make a safe decision about getting into your local water. And at Swim, Drink, Fish, for many years, our most popular question we received was, is it safe to swim? So this question is what spurred the creation of Swim Guide. And it's a question that we get from all over the world. It's a simple concept. We find the water monitoring results, or we take the water samples ourselves, and we publish those on Swim Guide as having either passed or failed the recreational water quality standard. It's a red flag or a green flag. You're good to go, or you're not good to go. Just to make this as easy as possible to understand. This is our Swim Guide family. Over 100 organizations that contribute to the platform to ensure that their communities have access to the information they need. And so when we combine all this information, we combine the beaches on Swim Guide across Canada, and we combine that WRSR data, that wastewater system effluent regulation data. This is kind of what we're left with. This is a striking example of why we do the work that we do, because it looks like that sewage is surrounded by our beaches, or our beaches are surrounded by that sewage. And as the One Health theory posits, we impact our environment and our environment impacts us in turn. So this is where we can then work together. After connecting to our water, collecting the data and sharing the information, we can restore those places that we love. And we've got a couple of examples that I'll just run through really quickly. In Toronto, a case study is the Bluffers Beach. Bluffers Beach is known throughout outlets like Narcity and Blog TO as one of Toronto or Ontario's hidden gems. like a shocking beach that's located right in the heart of the city as one of the most serene, beautiful blue spaces that you can get. But it wasn't always like this. Back in 2005, it failed to meet water quality standards consistently. It was only open as safe to swim for a few days each year. And so we consistently were getting numerous calls and complaints from beachgoers, community associations, and people who just wanted to know what was going on, why they couldn't swim at the beach that was right next to them. And so we launched an investigation as Lake Ontario Waterkeeper. And ultimately, we identified that there was a nearby sewage lagoon that was leaking into a stream that was outletting in that area. And by just addressing like a simple fix, like improving a buffer around that sewage lagoon and providing awareness of it, we were able to see Bluffers Beach experience a complete 180. Water quality improved, and water quality passes over 93% of the time. It's known as one of the highest quality beaches in Canada. In fact, Bluffers Beach is currently recognized as a Blue Flag Beach, which is an international accreditation of the highest quality beaches, marinas, and waterfronts across the world. And it's not the only one. Thanks to the swim, drink, fish movement, 8 of Toronto's 10 beaches, except those that are next to the rivers, are listed as Blue Flag beaches in Canada. Another example is in Kingston, where our work with municipalities, community organizations, and environmental law groups have resulted in policy changes that are mandating bypass reporting, combined sewer overflow, real-time alerts, and new awareness mechanisms that are designed to make people feel safe and to track the impact that these CSOs, these sewage spills, are having on our local environment. And so Kingston is the gold standard for what cities can achieve when they lean into the swim, drink, fish movement instead of away from it. The real-time alert system, combined with their historic investments in sewer separation, which is separating those combined sewers into sanitary and storm, and building new swimmable piers and infrastructure, really highlights a city that celebrates its connection to water at the outflow of one of the largest freshwater ecosystems on the planet, the Great Lakes. And then other cities have taken note too. So an environmental bill of rights submission to the city of Toronto resulted in mandatory reporting of bypass events on the 311 line. And there's currently events happening like this in Vancouver as well. And as a final example, as a way of showcasing our work, somewhere that's really close to home to me because it's where I started, is Lake Erie and our Niagara Hub. And just an example to show that it's not always sewage related, because in Niagara it was erosion. And so we worked together to restore sand dunes with Niagara Coastal, Swim, Drink, Fish, the local cities, the conservation authorities, and even private partners to restore one of the largest sand dune complexes left on the Great Lakes, to preserve those sand dunes that I saw when I was so young, that I was just enamored by. We saw that like by working together, we could start to restore these systems using natural processes, by using sand fences that would just capture windblown sand to start to restore some of these dunes from the erosion that they'd been experiencing in previous years. And then these are just a couple of other examples of what can happen when we end up working together. We can see tremendous improvements, and that really covers off our theory of change, that connect, collect, share, restore. But it always starts with connection. People protect what they love, and that's why that protection is so important to the work that we do at Swim, Drink, Fish. So that's all I have time for today. I think I'm pretty close to the end here. So I'm going to leave it here, but I'm very happy to answer any questions that anybody has about us, our work, our movements, where we're going next. But thank you all for the time today. It was a sincere pleasure.
Thank you so much, Greg. I'll just take you, do you want to take down your, yeah, I'll remove the spotlight. There we go. Okay. Wow, I learned a lot today. That's quite comprehensive, actually. Does anybody have any comments or questions for Greg? Michelle?
Yeah, thanks. I came on late and I don't know what I missed in the first half, but wow. So my question is, I am connected to can we transfer this to the US? Because I'm connected to virtually every state fish and wildlife agency, which I think could be involved in what you're talking about. And for me, this is like the restoration stuff is, you know, like you said, what you connect with, what you love, that's what you're going to protect. And I could see like lots of local community projects doing the same thing with the help of the, you know, state natural resources agencies. So is that something that's possible?
Absolutely. Our our model was really built coming out of the Waterkeeper Alliance model. So the Waterkeeper Alliance movement and the waterkeepers that sprung up throughout the states, over 70 of the 130 groups that are affiliates of ours on our Swim Guide platform are waterkeepers in the United States, whether it's like Buffalo Niagara Riverkeeper or the Lake Erie Waterkeeper. We do work with those groups, but that's not exhaustive. We're looking to work with as many people as we can because I'm a big proponents of the collective impact model. Together, we can turn those local actions into collective impact. So, yeah, absolutely. Let's connect. Let's see where we can go with this.
Awesome. Thanks.
I also arrived late. My apologies for that. I had a never-ending team meeting. I think we all know what that's like. This is my first time coming to one of these cafes. I work with Climate Reality Project Canada and specifically chair an initiative called the Atlantic Canada Climate Network. I noticed that throughout the examples that you used, most of them were Ontario and West. I'm wondering if you have, first off, any specific Atlantic projects that you work on, or if there's any Atlantic initiatives that are ongoing, and how can we as an organization partner with you to further, again, that beautiful collective impact model?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So we actually have staff on the East Coast. So we've been looking at the East Coast for, pardon me, quite a long time, particularly around the Halifax sewage spills that we've had in the last couple of years, as I'm sure you're aware. So we've been working with Reimagining Atlantic Harbors 2050, as well as Halifax Regional Municipality and the Atlantic Water Network around some of the issues there. There's some amazing groups doing some amazing work there, and so if there's any way that we can support them, we would absolutely love to do that. Our growth plan has focused to date from Vancouver. We mostly moved up into the Great Bear Rainforest, working with some of the Indigenous nations. That was last year. Our growth plan this year is focused around some of the Great Lakes, but absolutely interested in doing more work towards the East Coast and Atlantic Canada.
Wonderful. I'm going to drop my email in the chat here. If you would be so kind as to drop me an email, I'd love to take this conversation further and see what other synergies are between the work that we're doing. Also,
Absolutely.
kudos to what you're doing as well. Like sometimes, you know, boots on the ground, actual restoration projects can be the most taxing, hardest to organize, and most excruciating to actually move to being able to institute. But once they're in there creating such incredible ecosystems and biodiversity, it's such an amazing thing to witness. So thank you for that.
Thank you. It is a distinct pleasure of mine working in this field and with like-minded people. So I get a lot of personal fulfillment to it. It's hard at times, but it's absolutely worth it.
And just to let people know, I will be sending out a email with the replay link for this with Greg's email address. So don't panic if you didn't get it written down. Stephen.
Hello there, thank you. Yeah, I'm in Toronto and really enjoyed the presentation. I didn't see some of the earlier stuff as well, but I think one thing that I was really curious about, I actually did a project where we were doing the social community of water issues in South Africa a few years ago with the community there. We were doing this socio-drama topography, so they make a fabric map of their community, but it was an area where they were having trouble, there was a deficiency of water there, right? So it was a drought area and trying to find ways to get that. But one thing that I really like about what you're saying here and the whole watershed stuff in terms of community engagement is getting that multi-scale, multi-depth sort of thing going on. So a lot of the people often talk about environmental stewardship, and then you sort of get into the kind of environmental psychology of it. And I think there's what I like here, and I think is the eco-psychology bridge becomes more viable, because eco-psychology, like a lot of what we were doing was sort of more, you're mentioning is really powerful sort of environmental stewardship, environmental studies, environmental psychology, and then eco psychology has a kind of a slightly less tangible, maybe a bit more biological knowing. And be interesting how you see that being able to bridge more eco psychology into that.
Yeah, I'll be honest. My background is not in eco-psychology. I am a passionate amateur. But the way that I have seen our movement is particularly swim drink fish is able to position itself in a unique position being an environmental charity where we can engage with stakeholders at like you were talking about sort of multi-level like with governments but as well as like with individuals and community levels, so we're able to act as that facilitating conduit of ideas back and forth to bridge the divide between sort of the community way of knowing versus the government way of operating, which has always been an interesting area for me. But I think that's all that I can actually speak on to that point. Like I said, passionate amateur.
Thanks. Yeah, it's
And
a
actually,
challenge.
yeah, and Stephen, I can just jump on too. I invited Greg to speak because of the 4 pillars, the first one being connect. And connection is the relationship building, that is eco-psychology. So in my simple mind, Greg's using swim, drink, fish is using eco-psychology to begin the process of all of the other pillars. Would that be misspoke? Would you agree with that, Greg?
I would absolutely agree with that. Like, none of this happens without that first connection, and many communities are connected with their water. We do have the unfortunate reality in some communities, like certain areas of Toronto, for example, where the water was, your access to it was bifurcated. It was where the industry was, and there's now a stigma around you can't swim in Toronto's water. And so part of what we do is trying to address that as well. But for most people, they're already connected. They already have a story of a water body that they're connected to. And so that story is the first step on their path in the movement.
And just another little piece too, for the people that came late, Greg did speak about the watermark program, which I'll send a link about to that. And that is actually sharing stories, your water story about your connection. And that's pure eco-psychology again. So, but I'll send that up in a follow-up email. Has anybody else got any questions or comments?
Greg, does your organization know about the Earth Rights movement, which is the legal standing aspect that, granting personhood to bodies of water? Polly Higgins
Yes.
was the initiator of that work, so I'm just hoping that you're aware of it and that you're sort of working on that.
Yes, yeah, we're aware of the movements and granting legal personhood to water bodies. There's some amazing
good.
examples around the world. We're
Yes.
currently working with the Anishinaabe Youth Council around a proposal for personhood of the Great Lakes and the St.
Oh,
Lawrence River.
wow. Fabulous.
It's a long journey. That's what I can say about it at the moment, but it's a worthwhile journey because water is a relation of ours, and we need to treat it as such. And just like all of our relations, they're people.
Wonderful. That's so good to hear. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
I want to ask a question. Greg, that map you showed with locations all around the country, like I'm curious because I know you mentioned rivers, there's the ocean, there's the Great Lakes. I don't know if there's been monitoring hubs around smaller lakes. I guess what would be smaller lakes? Like I'm thinking about where I am in the Columbia Valley at the moment, and I think one of the concerns is even boat traffic on a lake that size and what that does. So I'm just curious if there's things going on that front.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely areas where we're doing monitoring in like smaller recreational waters. So, for example, like the Muskokas, we're currently working in the Muskoka region of Ontario to establish like a centralized community hub where concerned lake cottage owner associations can deliver samples and actually come in for training, things like that. We're doing the same thing on Vancouver Island with the Vancouver Island Lake Steward Society. So it's definitely an area where we do work. And you alluded to it perfectly. Like there's a concern around boat traffic or invasive species or whatever those community level concerns are. And at Swim Drink Fish, we try to work with those communities to identify a new protocol, like a new module that we can build into our toolkit to standardize that across so that we can speak the Western scientific language, but bring in those local concerns so that the information can be used to inform policy decisions. So it's definitely something we're doing, but we're consistently growing. And honestly, I'm open to working wherever. So if you have ideas.
Good to know.
Super. Well, we've kind of come down to the end of our hour, and I respect everyone's time for coming and attending, and watch for the emails coming out shortly with some interesting topics. Next month, we have a topic on why parking lots are so depressing, conversation about eco-psychology in the city. Yeah, so I hope, thank you very much, Greg. This was so informative. I am so, my heart is happy seeing efforts like this coming up. And yeah, thank you. And thank you
My
everyone
distinct pleasure.
yeah, and thanks everyone for your interest and support. So you take care, get outside. Bye.
Thanks, Greg.
There you go.